He rode into the city of Jerusalem, and people were cheering him on as one from God, waving palm branches at him. So Palm Sunday. It's also peanut butter and jelly day, so palm branches and peanut butter, So there's that. Hey, if you're cool with this, I'd love for you to turn to the people you're sitting next to or sitting around, and I'd love for you to share with them what you're looking forward to most about this Easter or this season, all right? Whatever you're looking forward to most. Ready, set, go. All right. Can you think of some famous walks that have happened down through the years? Like the first spacewalk, for instance. That happened, you know when that happened? March of 1965, at the age of 30, a Soviet cosmonaut made the first spacewalk in history. He actually beat out the American rival Ed White on Gemini 4 by 3 months. Spacewalk. Also in March 1965, there was that important 5-day civil rights walk led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from Selma, Alabama to the capital, Montgomery, Alabama. It was a 54-mile walk. Very important walk. Back to space, there was the first moonwalk on July 20th of 1969 when Neil Armstrong, he planted his spacey Doc Martens in that cheesy surface known as the moon. It was a pretty big deal, right? If it really happened, Anybody remember watching that live by chance? Okay, a few of you, yeah. So there's that moonwalk, and then there's the other moonwalk, right? Popularized in 1983, which probably most of you have tried at one point in time or another. Of course, yeah. No, I appreciate it. Maybe at our third service today. Got a little hot in here. Of course, there are famous places to walk in this great big old world of ours, right? For instance, you could go in the Andes Mountains of Peru and walk up Machu Picchu, which is about 8,000 feet in elevation. Or you could go to that dormant volcano in Tanzania, Mount Kilimanjaro, about 19,000 feet above sea level. Or if you really want to step it up and walk in the Himalayan mountain range, you could rise to an elevation of 29,000 feet above sea level and walk up Mount Everest. That's quite a hike. Closer to home here in the States, you could walk along the Appalachian Hiking Trail, 2,200 miles long. That's a long walk, isn't it? Anybody ever walked the Appalachian Trail at some point? Anybody ever walked the whole thing? A lot of you probably walk on the Gunpowder, right? There's, of course, the boardwalk in Ocean City. I bet almost everybody in here has been on the boardwalk in Ocean City. Or a little more metaphorically, there's the catwalk where you do your little dance. Or there's walking like an Egyptian with the bangles. Or walking on sunshine, because don't it feel good? Or walking in Memphis. Or the proclaimers, right? Claiming they'd walk not just one 500 miles, but 500 more miles just to fall down at somebody's door. There's walking the line with Johnny Cash, you know. There's the ministry of silly walks, Monty Python's Flying Circus. There's a walk to remember with Mandy Moore, or a walk in the clouds with John Wick. Or there's getting walked in baseball. Hey, how about those O's, huh? This is the year. Say it while you can. But today I want to talk about what might be the most famous walk in the entire Bible. We're looking at these encounters Jesus had with different people after the resurrection. And this encounter and this walk, it happened about 33 A.D., and we read about it in the Bible in the book of Luke, the 24th chapter, 13th verse to the 32nd verse. Here's what we read. Now that same day, which was a Sunday, it was Resurrection Sunday, that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. Now, about how long would it take the average person to walk 7 miles? If you walk it at about like 3.5 miles an hour, how long would it take?
2.5 hours.
Yeah, pretty good guess. So we're going to go with 2. 2 hours, more or less. 2 to 2.5 hours. Would any of you trivia buffs know who the longest walk in world history was? Who took it? Yeah, well, you'd think Forrest Gump, right? But that was more of a run, all right? That was about 15,000 miles, by the way, they estimate. Now, it's probably George Megan, who in 1977 walked from the southern tip of South America to the northern tip of Alaska, 19,000 miles on that walk. Do you know why he did it? I don't know. Nobody knows, you know. Yeah, back to Luke, verse 14 here, and these two folks are walking to Emmaus from Jerusalem, 7 miles, 2.5 hours or so. And in a moment, we're going to learn that the name of one of the walkers is Cleopas, which is a guy's name. The name of the other walker isn't revealed here in Luke, but I'm pretty sure, and most scholars believe that the other walker was Walker, Texas Ranger. We're pretty sure. So Cleopas and Walker, Texas Ranger, they're talking with each other about everything that had happened, right? As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. Jesus asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? And that's a fair question, right? And they hear the question, and the two of them, they stop walking. They stand still. Their faces are downcast, the Bible says. They're dejected, they're kind of devastated. And then one named Cleopas asked Jesus, are you a visitor to Jerusalem? Don't you know the things that have happened these last few days? He's obviously referring to the arrest and crucifixion of Jesus. In today's language, Cleopas would probably have said something like this. Are you kidding me? Like, you don't know what's going on? Really? You don't know what's going on? What planet are you from? Like, have you been living under a rock or something? Don't you know anything? Which kind of makes me wonder how Jesus would have responded to those questions, right? What planet are you from? Well, I'm actually from planet heaven. You've been living under a rock or something? Well, as a matter of fact, I spent the last 3 days, behind a big rock. Does that count, And don't you know anything? Well, actually, I know everything. But instead of that, Jesus simply says, what things? What's been going on? You tell me. They said about Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people, but the chief priests handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. Now, this next verse is very, very important. Verse 21, look at it closely. We'll come back to it, but they say, but we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. That's what they were hoping for. And what is more, it's the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but they didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but him they did not see. Like they may have been concluding that maybe the body was stolen or desecrated or something like that. So how does Jesus respond to these two dejected travelers? Does he say like, oh man, I feel your pain, I see your dejection, I sense your sorrow, let me pray for you? Nope. How's this for a kind and compassionate response from Jesus? He said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? I mean, shazam, right? You might expect something else from Jesus, But he emphatically says how thick-headed you are, how slow of heart you are. Why didn't you believe all that the prophets had said? I mean, he's bringing it here. And then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. All right, so Jesus, talked for a while as they walked along that 7-mile walk. He gave a little sermon. He did some teaching here. Quick question. How much time did Jesus have to give his sermon to him? 2 to 2.5 hours. We're going to go with 2.5. So settle in, kids. As fair is fair. Where the Bible speaks, we speak, right? All right, so then they arrive at the home of these travelers, and Jesus gives indication that he's going to keep on walking. I love verse 28. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. Jesus acted like he was going to keep going. Jesus is saying, if you've had enough of this conversation, no worries. Like, you're not going to hurt my feelings at all. I'll just keep walking. Gang, Jesus never forced himself on anybody. Not in that day, not in this day. You get to decide. Jesus is communicating, tell me if you've had enough. Like, I'll limit my supply to your demand. So he says, hey, I'm going to continue on as if he's going further. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day's almost over. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread. He gave thanks. He broke it and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And as soon as they recognized him, the Bible says, and he disappeared from their sight. Vanished. Poof. Put on his invisibility cloak, and he was just gone, Now, the next verse, they say, like, what's the matter with us? How come we didn't recognize him on the road? How come we didn't recognize him when he was giving us this teaching, this Bible study? How come we didn't recognize him right away? Instead, verse 32 says this, they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? Were not our hearts burning? And the Bible says that those two walkers, after they had recognized Jesus and he disappeared, they ran the 7 miles all the way back to Jerusalem. Question, how long did it take them to run all the way back? 2.5 hours. You ever run in sandals before? Come on. Took them the same time. They got blisters, things breaking. But they gathered the disciples. They run back. They gather the disciples together, and they say, hey, in case you're wondering, Jesus really is alive. We just had a 2-hour sermon from him. We just walked 7 miles with him. We just ate with him. He broke bread in our house. He's alive. We've seen him. We're eyewitnesses to it. This might be the most amazing walk in the entire Bible. Absolutely unforgettable. But there was that one quite uncomfortable moment during that talk with Cleopas, where they said, we had hoped that Jesus would redeem Israel, but he got sentenced to death and was crucified. And then Jesus calls them foolish, and he teaches that long teaching there. Let's just unpack what's going on here. Because you see, the real reason these two walkers on that 7-mile hike were as bummed out as they were that day was that they had gotten their dreams dashed. Right? They said as much in verse 21. But we had hoped, 4 words. But we had hoped. And my guess is every single person in this room has at one time or another said a phrase like that, similar to that, or maybe that phrase. But I had hoped that my job was secure. But I had hoped that my son or my daughter, was finally grown up, getting their act together. But I had hoped that he was the one or she was the one. But I had hoped to be married by now. I had hoped to have kids by now. But I had hoped we'd get a better report from the doctor. I had hoped that my marriage would last forever. I had hoped that the best days were ahead of us. But I had hoped. I hoped one thing, but in reality, it's another thing. I wanted this, but it turned out a different way. And man, that can be tough to deal with. For these two walkers to Emmaus, they could understand. They had huge hopes in Jesus. And they had just gotten their dreams dashed. They had observed Jesus' ministry for 3 years, and they saw his wisdom, and they saw his power, and they had begun to hope. They had begun to hope that God had finally heard the cries of the Jews to send a king, a Messiah, a liberator, to get Israel out from underneath Roman oppression. They were so sick of Roman oppression and Roman occupation in Israel. They were so sick of seeing Roman soldiers in their streets and in their yards. They were sick of the tax rates that they were first forced to pay by the Romans and the recession that it had brought on their local economy. They were just sick of it all. And here comes this incredible leader. I mean, he's young, he's smart, he's charismatic, he's honest, he flies straight, he's trustworthy, he's bold, he's self-disciplined, he's a fantastic communicator. And to top it all off, he possesses these supernatural powers. And so they start connecting all the dots, and they say to each other, well, he's it, man. He is the one. He's the one sent from God. Sent from God to do what? To bring a regime change, right? To throw the Romans out on their ears, to put Israel's future back in its own hands, to get rid of the back-breaking tax burden, to stimulate the economy, to get things rolling again. Then, finally, all of Israel can get back to normal. People can go about their business. People can be free to do as they please. There was no deep spiritual reason why those two walkers were dejected and sorrow-filled that day. They were dejected because their political dream had been dashed. That's it. They were heartbroken because they hoped the Messiah would make their lives easier, make their lives more comfortable. And when Jesus realizes that this was at the heart of their dejection, he has to do this little Bible study because he realizes they had just lost the plot altogether. He has to reacquaint them with the reality that God sent his son to planet Earth to bring about a regime change, all right, but a whole other level of a regime change than these two walkers were thinking about that day. So Jesus takes them all the way back to the book of Genesis, no doubt. He gives them the Cliff Notes version of the story of God and the people he created. I think he started right out in Genesis 1:1. He says, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, right? He starts out in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He says this isn't the result of a cosmic accident in the ancient past. God created the heavens and the earth. And on the final day of creation, he formed these magnificent two creatures out of the dust of the ground, stamped his image on them, breathed into them the breath of life. And then he placed them in this incredible environment, this 5-star eco-friendly garden resort environment, you know. And he said, enjoy nature and enjoy each other and enjoy my company. Blessings on you. Enjoy every bit of it. Just one thing. Just one thing. Don't ever try to usurp your positions as created beings and attempt to become gods yourself, because it'll never, ever work. It'll create terrible dynamics in your relating patterns. It'll take you down paths of unimaginable destruction for generations to come, all right? And as many of you, if not most of you know, they didn't get it long because the woman and the man disobeyed God's request. They decided they wanted to be in charge. They wanted to run the show. They wanted to make their own rules. They wanted to submit to no one other than themselves. And in doing so, they cut themselves off from the fellowship they'd enjoyed with God. And it left them feeling guilty and alone and ashamed. It left them at odds with each other. It left them at odds with the creation. It left them at odds with the Creator. And get this, within 3 generations of that original sin, we see the introduction into the human race of hatred and violence and envy and polygamy and deceitfulness and drunkenness and immorality and murder. And from there, human behavior goes so far south that by the 6th chapter of the book of Genesis, God makes this observation in Genesis 6:5 about the human race. He says, the Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. Evil all the time. Every inclination. They were making up bad plans recreationally. It's like it's all they thought about. The inclination of the human heart was evil all the time. And the next verse says that God was so grieved by what he saw, his heart was so filled with pain, that he had made man on the earth. See, Genesis 6:6. It was like, this is not the way it should have gone. This is not what I had in mind with the human race. Now listen, God knew from the very beginning that we human beings are not equipped to be our own masters. Whenever we try, we make a royal mess of it all. See? History has proven it will always go horribly wrong when human beings just kind of strut around thinking that we can run our own lives. So back to the story of God and his created beings that Jesus is telling these travelers on the road to Emmaus about. God has this decision to make. 3 options, right? He can turn his back on humanity, let it self-destruct. I mean, it was already headed that way, right? Not going to take very long. Second choice, he can eradicate the whole thing, wipe it out, blow it up, be done with it. Or the third option is he can attempt to redeem and restore these fallen people. And that, number 3, is the highest cost option. It's the riskiest option. It's the option that will push God to the very limits of his patience with humanity. But option 3 is the option he chooses. And the centerpiece of how he's going to pull it all off will take the breath away from everyone who truly, truly understands it, you see. The centerpiece of it all is a thing called substitutionary atonement. The prophet Isaiah talked about this 700 years before Jesus was even born. Listen to these words. But he, I'm talking about Jesus here, looking ahead in history, he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The punishment that we deserved was put on him, and by his wounds we are healed. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. All right? We've all gone astray. Gang, I've gone astray. I got my hand up, right? I have gone astray on more occasions than you could ever imagine. I have left the rails of God's best intention for my life on many occasions and gone into ditches. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us, every one of us, has turned to his own way. And yet the Lord laid on him, on Jesus, the iniquity, the sins, the wrongdoings of all of us. If I were a betting man, and maybe I am, I would bet my eye tooth that this was the central part of Jesus' conversation as he walked with those 2 travelers. It had to be, because it's what the Bible is all about, you see. Because it's the central concept in the Christian faith. And it is what differentiates Christianity from every other way of thinking about faith and God in our world today. And don't let those 2 big words fool you. Substitutionary atonement. We talk about it from time to time around here. Like when you were in elementary school and your regular teacher got sick, they sent your class a what? That's right, a substitute. What did you do to your substitute? You did horrible things to your substitute teacher. You sure did. A substitute is someone who takes the place of another. What about atonement? Well, think of it like this. You get stopped doing a 55 in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. You get a ticket. You go to traffic court, let's say, and the judge will tell you how you're going to atone for that offense. The judge tells you what will satisfy the demands of justice, what is required. You pay a fine, $300 fine, traffic school, whatever, and then you pay them out or you go to the class, and that's atoning for your wrongdoing. That's satisfying the demands of justice, right? Now stick with me here, because this is what is at the heart of the Christian faith. This is why Good Friday, which is coming up this Friday, this is why Good Friday is good. When our holy God decided to redeem and restore screwed up, rebellious people, of which I am one, as are you, someone had to satisfy the demands of justice. Someone had to pay my moral traffic fines, and yours as well. And God sovereignly decided to send in a substitute so that I didn't have to pay my fine and you don't have to pay yours. And that substitute was Jesus Christ. He was the substitutionary atoner. And the atoning fine that had to be paid was death. Through Jesus. God, through Jesus, actually pays the penalty himself, you see. It's a sobering thought, but a very true thought. Our wrongdoings, all accumulated, are so serious and so plentiful that they demanded the ultimate sacrifice to satisfy the standards of justice. See, sin is a serious, serious, serious deal. And I used to think about it like this. I've told you about this before, but I used to think about, when I would think about this, I used to think about being in a courtroom and, kind of framing it up here. And I'd be standing before the judge, and my lawyer, is beside me. And the lawyer, I'm guilty of whatever it is. And my lawyer there says to the judge, Judge, listen, I know Dave here, he did something wrong like this, but Judge, we got to go easy on him. Just take it easy on Dave. He's a pretty good guy overall, like he tips well, he's kind to most animals, he doesn't, do drugs, he keeps his car clean, he holds the door open for people, let's go a little easy on him, I used to think of it that way, but that's not it. This is actually what's going on here, okay? I'm in the courtroom, I'm guilty, my lawyer says, Judge, he's totally guilty of sin. He's just totally did it, he's in trouble, and you should throw the book at him. That's the only just thing to do, right? A just society, you got to have justice. You got to throw the book at him, Judge. And the judge comes down with the verdict and, the sentencing, and the lawyer says, but give it to me. I'll take it. Let him go free. He's the one who did it. I don't deserve it, but I'll take his place. The punishment that is meant for him should go to me. See, substitutionary atonement is the doctrine of Jesus dying on the cross in our place. It's not just a sacrificial giving. It's the theology of Jesus taking on our sins and giving us his righteousness. He imputeth me unto his righteousness is the technical word. The ultimate trade-off is what it is. His for ours. Peter writes about this in the Bible in 1 Peter 3:18 when in his first epistle saying, For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring to us God, being put to death in the flesh, but being made alive in spirit. Which is why, going back to this conversation on the 7-mile walk, Jesus says to these two travelers, did not the Christ have to suffer these things? The Jews were thinking that the Romans screwed up or that the chief priests screwed up or that some terrible accidental thing had happened to the Messiah. And Jesus is saying, no. This wasn't an accident to the hands of someone who didn't know what they were doing. This has been God's plan since the book of Genesis, that a substitutionary atoner would come and take the place and take the hit that human beings should have taken. And listen, here's at the heart of our faith. If we don't get this, we don't get God, we don't get the Bible, we don't understand Jesus. The two travelers on the road that day were dashed with disappointment because the one they thought who was bringing a political regime change to their oppressive circumstances had been killed before he got the job done. That's what they thought. And Jesus is saying to them that what really went down in Jerusalem is God's substitutionary atoner willingly shed the last drop of his own blood to pay for the wrongdoings of all the people throughout human history who have been running their own little regimes and racking up huge piles of moral debt in the process. The crucifixion in Jerusalem was not a defeat, Jesus is saying. It wasn't an accident. It was humanity's ultimate triumph. It was God's plan from Genesis on. Sin has now been paid for forever for anybody who chooses it. And Jesus says to these two travelers when he's breaking bread with them, he says, see, I'm here in your midst. I'm fully resurrected, proving that all of this is true. Every single bit of it is true. Which is why after, when Jesus disappeared from their table, when he was blessing the bread, those two individuals there at the table said to each other, were not our hearts on fire when he was explaining the scriptures, when he was explaining the idea of substitutionary atonement, our spirits were on fire. And they said that because anybody throughout history who has heard and grasped the beauty and the power and the concept of substitutionary atonement for them feels like their heart is on fire. See? And for those of you who claim the name Christian, you wear that title You consider yourself a follower of Jesus. There should be a moment in your life when the light bulb went on and you understood for the very first time that being a Christian does not involve trying to please a God you know you've disappointed and trying to climb your way into his good favor. You can't. You can't. And you realize you can't. What happens is when the light bulb goes on, you get the idea of substitutionary atonement. You get that Jesus took your hit and salvation is available from him, because of him, as a free gift. You come to grasp atoning grace. You get it. It sinks all the way in, and that changes everything. Changes your motivation, changes your values, changes your perspective, changes how you see yourself, changes how you see everyone else around you. It changes your hopes. It changes your dreams. It changes your understanding of the world we find ourselves in. It changes everything. And I don't know if you ever wake up and you think, if you're still in charge of your life, if you think, I'm just messing up my life, man. I'm making such a mess of it. Sooner or later, people have to come to terms with the fact that God didn't send Jesus to planet Earth to merely improve the circumstances of people's lives, to make people's lives easier or more comfortable. Jesus didn't come and die just so your life could be more comfortable. People have needs far deeper than the external circumstances of their lives. Beneath the veneer of life, human beings have deep, deep needs, and the greatest need is for every human being to be rightly reconciled to the God who made them. You will never know life in all its fullness until you're rightly and closely connected to and relating to God. We're just like these two guys headed to Emmaus. We have hopes, don't we? And most often, this is how almost everybody starts out coming to God, coming to Jesus. We come to Jesus hoping that he'll fix something in our life. We want Jesus to make our life easier, our circumstances better, our circumstances a little more comfortable, you see. We want Jesus to help fix the thing that we got going on, For them, it was politics. They were hoping he'd fix the politics that were going on. For us, it's whatever's right before us, We think this thing that is before us, these circumstances, whatever's coming at us or whatever, we think it's the most important thing. Whatever it is, that relationship, that test, your health. We think if I could just get through this, if God could just help me with this, if Jesus could just help me with this thing right here. And all the while, he's the greater thing, you see. We don't even know what our greatest need is most of the time. We see Jesus as a piece of our lives, that we got something going on here. All the while, he's actually the primary thing, see. We want him to make our life more comfortable. If you want your heart to be on fire, like their heart was on fire, you got to see Jesus for who he is, not your version of him. Not our version of him, you see. We're on the fast track to Easter, gang. And so many people think Easter is about spring and bunnies and flowers and eggs, and good vibes and the end of winter, and spring has finally sprung, and all that kind of stuff. Or here's what we say with Easter. A lot of times at Easter we'll say, well, I'll give God an extra little nod, a little extra attention there, hoping that he'll make my life easier for another season, a little more comfortable. But we're still in charge of our life. And there's no power in it. And there's no purpose in it. And there's no wonder and awe and gratitude and worship. And we're weighed down by guilt or anxiety. And we're frustrated. We get knocked off our rocker by the smallest of things. And we're missing the grandeur of what Jesus did, who he is, and his cosmic accomplishment for you and for me. Don't blast through this Easter and just continue on being that way. Be captured again, or maybe for the first time, be captured by what Jesus did, his sacrificial atonement. And we're going to commemorate it right now through communion. And I know, before you jump around, hold on just a second, okay? You'll have time to get that little packet. All right? But we're going to commemorate it right now. And I want to encourage you to be captured again by what really went on. We have those individually wrapped packets. If you didn't get one, you get them in the back. They have a piece of bread and juice to remind us of Jesus giving his body and his blood for us, his sacrificial atonement. Let me read this 1 Peter again for us, and then we'll celebrate communion together. 1 Peter 3:18 says this, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit."